London, 1814. The ballroom of Grosvenor House shimmered beneath 1,000 trembling lights, each crystal droplet of the chandeliers scattering the glow like a constellation trapped indoors. Music swelled, polite laughter followed, and the rustle of silk swept through the air like wind through reeds. Yet amid that glittering perfection stood Lady Evelina Hartwell, hands folded before her, her breath shallow. The evening should have been her triumph, the announcement of her engagement to the Duke of Ashbourne, but triumph had always come to her wrapped in the fine paper of apprehension. She was 22, the daughter of a baronet whose fortune had long since dwindled to memory. Her gown was ivory, embroidered with thread borrowed from her aunt's dowry chest, and her smile, soft, deliberate, was her only true adornment. Around her, the ton murmured, "A beauty, yes, but poor. Clever, dangerously so. Too proud for her purse." They said these things with a sweetness of gossip, that genteel venom that passed for conversation among London's elite. Evelina heard every word but met it with the same composure her mother had taught her. Do not flinch before cruelty, let it die against your stillness. At the far end of the hall stood the Duke of Ashbourne, tall, solemn, and exquisitely remote. He was 32, a man carved by grief into marble. His late wife had died 3 winters before, leaving him heirless, and in that silence his estate had grown colder, his heart more deliberate. He had vowed to take a bride not for love, but for necessity, an heir, nothing more. Tonight, his presence alone had reduced every debutante to trembling ambition. Yet when his gaze fell upon Evelina, there was no recognition of desire, only the calculation of a man measuring a legacy. The music shifted, a waltz. The Duke crossed the floor, the crowd parting before him like a tide before a ship's hull. He stopped before Evelina and extended his hand, gloved and motionless. "Lady Evelina," he said, voice low and even, "would you do me the honor of this dance?" The room hushed. She curtsied, her gloved fingers brushing his. For the briefest moment, their eyes met, her calm defiance against his solemn resolve, and something unspoken trembled between them, fragile as glass. They danced beneath the glow of gold and envy. The Duke's movements were precise, his restraint evident in every turn. Evelina followed his lead, though her heartbeat misstepped, her breath quickening. Around them, whispers bloomed like ivy. The Duke has chosen her? The girl with no fortune. Each murmur pressed heavier against her ribs. Yet as the waltz carried them forward, she felt something shift within the silence between their words, the faintest thaw in the man everyone called unfeeling. "You seem uneasy," he said quietly, his gaze fixed ahead. "Uneasy," she replied. "I am simply unaccustomed to being the subject of so much interest." "Interest," he murmured, almost to himself. A gentler word for scrutiny. Her eyes lifted to his, startled by the trace of sympathy there. But before she could answer, the edges of the room began to waver. The candles blurred, the violins twisted into distant echoes. A tremor passed through her, faint, then fierce. Her hand slipped from his. Gasps rippled across the hall. The Duke caught her just as she crumpled, her body folding against his arm like silk sinking into water. The orchestra faltered to silence. "Clear the floor," he commanded, voice slicing through the confusion. No one moved until he carried her himself, past the sea of startled faces, into the adjoining antechamber. There, amid the hush of servants and the scent of roses, he laid her upon a chaise and knelt beside her, his composure cracking for the first time. Her skin was pale, her lips parted in a whisper too soft to catch. "Fetch the physician," he ordered, though his hand still lingered near her pulse. When her eyelids fluttered open, she found his face above hers, not the cold Duke of society, but a man momentarily stripped of armor. "You are safe," he said, though his tone betrayed uncertainty. The physician came swiftly, murmuring about exhaustion, delicate nerves, too little air. Yet as he stepped aside to whisper to the Duke, his brow furrowed with another meaning. The Duke's expression hardened. "Are you certain?" "As certain as one can be, Your Grace. The lady's condition suggests an expectation." The Duke's jaw tightened. Behind the heavy doors, voices gathered, a symphony of scandal already composing itself. Evelina stirred again, her lashes trembling. "Do not send them away," she whispered. "They will only talk more." "They will talk regardless," he said, his tone measured. "But they shall not harm you." She closed her eyes again, tears slipping silently past her composure. The Duke turned away, the rhythm of his breath too steady to be natural. Outside, laughter began anew, brittle, rehearsed, as if the collapse of a young woman were no more than an interlude in society's performance. Later that night, when the guests had gone and the chandeliers burned low, the Duke found himself pacing the length of his library. The word expectation echoed in his mind with a weight he could not name. He had intended to marry Evelina for practical reasons. Her lineage respectable enough, her manner discreet, her intelligence a quiet advantage. He had not meant to touch her heart, nor for her to touch his. Yet that single fainting spell had unleashed something that propriety could not contain. Suspicion, tenderness, fear. A knock came at the door. His valet entered softly. "Your Grace, Lady Evelina requests a word." He hesitated, then nodded. She entered, her posture fragile but unyielding, her face illuminated by the dying firelight. Her voice was quiet. "You have questions." He studied her for a long moment before speaking. "Only one. Is it true what they now whisper? That you are with child?" She met his gaze, her expression stripped of pretense. "It is true." His breath left him in silence. The room seemed to shrink until only her voice filled it. "You think I sought this," she continued, her tone trembling between pride and sorrow. "You think I wished to ensnare you, but you forget, Your Grace, it was you who sought me. You who came to my father with your proposal of convenience." His eyes darkened, though not with anger. "And yet it seems convenience has betrayed us both." She turned toward the door, her shoulders straightening. "Then let it be known, before the world decides for us. Whatever becomes of me, I shall not beg forgiveness for what was born of honesty." He took a single step toward her. "Lady Evelina." She faced him again, eyes bright with defiance and despair. "The child is yours, Your Grace. Though it seems the world already knows before you wish to." For a moment, neither moved. The fire crackled between them, throwing amber light across the space that duty had built and longing threatened to destroy. Somewhere beyond the window, London breathed, cold, judgmental, alive. And as the clock struck midnight, the Duke of Ashbourne understood that his careful order had fractured. What had begun as an arrangement of necessity had turned, without consent, into the first act of ruin, or redemption. Morning light crept across London like the aftermath of a confession. By dawn, the scandal had already escaped the Duke's household and settled like mist across Mayfair. Gossip was faster than truth, more graceful too, and by breakfast every drawing-room in the city spoke his name entwined with hers. Some said Lady Evelina Hartwell had fainted from guilt, others that the Duke himself had caused her shame. A few whispered with cruel delight that she had trapped him, clever girl, the baronet's daughter who had played the game too well. Evelina sat behind her window as these rumors echoed beyond the glass, her reflection ghostly against the morning light. The carriages passing below carried her reputation away with each wheel's turn. Inside her father's townhouse, silence was a mercy no one dared offer aloud. Her mother wept behind closed doors. Her father, worn thin by debt and pride, spoke only in half-broken phrases. "You will marry him now. There is no other course." Evelina did not protest. She merely nodded, her composure carved out of the same restraint that had been her armor all her life. Still, when the knock came at noon and the Duke himself stepped into their modest parlor, her hands trembled. He was as impeccably dressed as ever, though something had changed, a weight in his eyes, a stiffness that did not belong to dignity but to doubt. "Lady Evelina," he said with formal courtesy, "your family's honor has been unjustly dragged through mud. As it is my fault, it shall be my duty to restore it. I propose that we be married within the week." Her breath caught. His words were precise, noble even, but every syllable was cold enough to wound. "Duty," she repeated softly. "Not forgiveness, not affection, merely duty." "I make no claim to feelings I do not possess," he replied. "But I will see you protected. That much I can promise." She bowed her head, hiding the ache behind her lashes. "Then I accept, your grace." He inclined his head in solemn agreement, but as he turned to leave, something faint and unspoken lingered. He drew a small silver locket from his coat and placed it on the table. "For you," he said, his tone unreadable. "It bears my initials. A gesture, nothing more." When he left, the room seemed smaller, as if the air had gone with him. Evelina stared at the locket but did not touch it. She thought of how easily generosity could resemble distance when offered by those who feared their own hearts. The days that followed blurred into a quiet agony. Servants avoided her eyes, friends sent perfumed letters of condolence disguised as curiosity, and the newspapers grew bold in their insinuations. "A union of scandal and salvation," one line read, asterisk, "the Duke of Ashbourne finds redemption in haste." Asterisk Evelina folded the paper away, her lips pressed tight. It was not redemption she wanted, it was truth. Yet truth had no place in a city built on pretense. When the rain began that week, she took solace in the solitude it offered. The world stayed indoors, and she walked alone through the Hartwell garden, clutching her shawl against the wind. The flowers bent beneath the weather, yet none complained of their fall. She envied them that. It was there, beneath a gray sky, that the Duke found her again. He approached with the deliberation of a man unused to uncertainty. "You should not walk unchaperoned," he said quietly. "Am I not already beyond reproach, your grace?" Her voice was gentle but edged with irony. "They have named my sin before I had time to commit it." He hesitated. "Then let me amend what I can. Once you are my wife, they will find new tongues to wag." "And will marriage silence them?" she asked, "or simply give them new verses to sing?" He looked away, unable to answer. The sound of rain softened the space between them. For a long while, they stood without speaking, their breaths mingling with the scent of wet earth. Then she said, almost to herself, "Why must love be treated as a scandal, and indifference as virtue?" The words startled him more than he cared to show. "Because love," he replied after a pause, "is the one thing society cannot command. And what cannot be commanded must be condemned." She turned to him then, and for the first time, her voice broke its calm restraint. "Do you truly feel nothing, Edward? Not even regret for what we have become?" Her use of his name struck him like an open hand. For a heartbeat he said nothing, then lowered his gaze. "Regret is a luxury I have not afforded myself in years. It changes nothing, and I have seen enough graves to know that feeling cannot raise the dead." Evelina's breath trembled. "It is not the dead I wish to raise, your grace. Only the living." The rain deepened, drumming against the marble steps. He should have left her then, should have retreated into his practiced restraint. But instead, he stepped closer, his gloved hand almost touching hers. "You must not speak so," he said, though his voice carried the opposite of warning. "If I named what I felt, Lady Evelina, I would be lost to it." The silence that followed was not empty but charged, fragile. Then, without another word, he turned away, leaving her in the garden, her tears indistinguishable from the rain. That night, as she prepared to retire, her maid handed her a folded letter, sealed with the Duke's crest. Evelina hesitated before opening it, expecting some matter of arrangement. Yet what she found was not addressed to her at all. The ink was faded, the date older, 3 years past. The salutation read simply, "My dearest Catherine." It was a letter never sent, a confession to the Duke's late wife. The words bled grief. "Forgive me for failing you. For wanting the world to forget your absence when mine refused to. I cannot forgive myself for the child you never held, nor for the vow I made never to risk love again." Evelina pressed a trembling hand to her lips. The ache she had mistaken for indifference was something deeper, sorrow petrified into silence. Outside, thunder cracked. Without thinking, she took the letter and the locket and fled into the storm, her gown clinging to her like consequence. She reached his townhouse, rain streaming from her hair as she was shown into his study. He rose sharply at her entrance, shock flaring in his eyes. "You should not be here," he said. "Then dismiss me," she answered, her voice shaking. She placed the unopened locket on his desk beside the letter. "I found this among your things. I did not mean to pry, but now I know why you hide behind duty. You fear the same grief that once broke you." He said nothing, his silence both confession and denial. "You wished for an heir," she continued, "but this child within me is not a monument to your title. It is proof that you are still capable of mercy, of warmth, of life." "Evelina." "No," she interrupted, her tone trembling yet resolute. "Do not touch me from pity, for pity is not what this heart deserves." The storm outside roared, its echo filling the space between them. For the first time, the Duke's composure wavered. He looked at her not as a responsibility, but as something dangerously human. Yet before words could bridge the distance, she turned away. The door closed softly behind her, leaving him alone with the sound of the rain and the faint glimmer of a silver locket, unopened, gleaming with the reflection of a man who had forgotten how to feel. The rain had not yet ceased when the Duke of Hailworth returned to the grand ballroom, his boots echoing sharply against the marble as servants whispered along the corridor. He had left for scarcely 10 minutes, just long enough to speak with the physician, but in that short absence, the air inside had curdled with speculation. The night had begun as a celebration, the Duke's long-awaited reappearance after months in the countryside, a chance for London's elite to judge the man who bore both scandal and fortune in equal measure. Now it was hushed panic, and all eyes darted to the young woman lying motionless near the foot of the staircase. Eleanor. The Duke's gaze found her instantly, even across the room. She was not dressed as a woman who wished to be seen. Her gown was modest, ivory silk with little ornament, her hair pinned neatly without diamonds or vanity. Yet something about her demanded notice. He had observed it earlier, though he hadn't meant to. The quiet defiance in her posture, the intelligence flickering behind her eyes when she had refused a dance with Lord Windsworth. He had thought her aloof. Now, seeing her pale and trembling, he felt a sharp, inexplicable pull in his chest. "Clear the floor," he ordered. The command sliced through the murmurs. Servants hurried forward. A physician bent beside the young woman, checking her pulse, while 2 maids fanned her helplessly. The Duke crouched down, ignoring the stares. "She's with child, Your Grace," the physician murmured after a moment's pause, his tone uncertain. "Likely fainted from exhaustion or fear." The Duke's expression did not change, but his fingers tightened against the polished floor. The guests exchanged glances, curiosity, disdain, delight at the scandal brewing before their eyes. He stood slowly, towering over them, his jaw set. "Then she will be taken to my carriage. Now." The murmur rippled again, this time heavier, tinged with disbelief. The Duke of Hailworth, the cold, widowed recluse who had sworn never to marry again, was taking personal charge of a fainting girl. By morning, the rumor had bloomed across London like wildfire. Eleanor awoke in a dimly lit chamber, her body heavy, her head throbbing. The room was unfamiliar but warm. She could smell lavender oil and firewood. When her eyes adjusted, she saw him sitting in a chair near the hearth, coat discarded, shirt sleeves rolled up, his gaze unreadable. "You're awake," he said quietly. She tried to rise, wincing. "Where am I?" "Hailworth Manor," he replied. "You fainted last night." Her mind swam with fragments, the candlelight, the sudden dizziness, the shocked gasps. "Why did you bring me here?" He did not answer immediately. "Because you were alone," he said at last. "And because," his voice trailed off, uncharacteristically uncertain, "you're with child. You shouldn't be left to the mercy of gossip." Eleanor's lips parted, but no sound came. Shame burned through her chest, though she had done nothing shameful. "You think it's yours," she whispered. His eyes flickered. "No," he said simply. "But that's not the question that matters." For the first time, she saw not the Duke who commanded fear and admiration, but a man at war with himself, between duty and something unspoken. He turned toward the window, where dawn spilled across the frost-laced garden. "I need an heir," he said quietly, almost to himself. "A son to carry the title, a name that endures. I intended to find a wife this season, nothing more." A transaction, not affection. Eleanor's heart tightened. And what does that have to do with me? He faced her again, his expression unreadable. Everything, perhaps. You faint in my ballroom, carrying a child no one claims. Society will devour you alive. I can offer protection, a name, a future for the babe. Her breath caught. You mean marriage? I mean necessity, he replied. For a long moment, silence filled the room. The fire crackled softly, casting amber light against his face. He looked every inch the Duke, commanding, detached, but there was something fractured beneath the calm. Eleanor studied him carefully. You don't even know me, she said at last. I know enough, he said. You did not seek attention. You tried to leave quietly after fainting. That alone tells me more than the women who parade themselves for fortune. Eleanor looked down at her trembling hands. You'd marry a woman you barely know, for a child that isn't yours? He gave a short, humorless laugh. You think it matters? The world already whispers that I'm cold, unfeeling, incapable of love. Perhaps they're right. But I can endure gossip. You, Miss Fairborn, cannot. Something in his voice, low, restrained, but carrying an edge of empathy, unnerved her. You'd tie yourself to ruin to protect a stranger? She asked softly. He stepped closer. I've lived among ruin for years. One more ghost at my table makes little difference. Eleanor met his eyes, and for a moment, something wordless passed between them. Recognition, perhaps, of two people trapped by circumstance. Her throat tightened. And if I refuse? Then you leave tomorrow, he said. You'll have coin and carriage to wherever you wish. But the whispers will follow, and London will not forgive. She turned away, her chest aching with confusion. The Duke's voice softened slightly. I don't ask affection, he said. Only that you allow me to give your child legitimacy. And in return, I gain what I sought, an heir. Eleanor pressed her palms together, eyes burning. You speak as though hearts were contracts. He gave a faint, tired smile. I've long ceased believing they are anything else. For a moment, neither spoke. Outside, the wind shifted, rattling the panes. The air between them grew taut, heavy with unsaid truths. Finally, Eleanor drew a slow breath. Then let it be as you wish, she whispered. But understand this, I may accept your name, but I will not surrender my dignity. The Duke inclined his head. Nor would I ask it of you. He extended his hand, gloved in black leather. She hesitated before placing her fingers upon it. His grip was firm, steady, and yet, somehow, gentle. When he released her, the air between them felt irrevocably changed. The terms were clear, spoken without affection yet weighted with something deeper neither dared name. That night, as the manor settled into silence, the Duke stood once more by the window, watching the pale moon ripple over the frozen lake. He had found his heir, or so he told himself. Yet in the quiet pulse of his thoughts, another truth stirred uneasily. For the first time in years, the loneliness within Hailworth Manor no longer belonged to him alone.